So, Chris, now let's take a closer look at a story that's, I think, very important in the industry right now. For a long time, we've been talking about the restrictions on trade with countries like, well, China, certainly, but also Russia with the Ukraine war. And things just heated up a little bit. So last week, it was announced that export or sale of advanced GPUs from Nvidia or AMD would no longer be allowed to Russia and China. Now, of course, Russia is blockaded because of the Ukrainian war anyway. But the China thing is interesting. This is an escalation of a ongoing trade war with China, and it comes just as two Chinese firms have announced their own homegrown GPU designs. What do you think this means overall? I guess for the industry in China, for the industry as a whole, and for the whole global supply chain to have the world's largest country cut off from the world's most advanced technology.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And obviously, there's some kind of reciprocal flows here that are going to be disrupted, right? Because a lot of this stuff is, maybe it's an NVIDIA chip, but it's then going to be taken to China and put into some other device that's then sold back to an American citizen. And so obviously that kind of stops. So there's some big ramifications for this. It's not just cutting China off, it's actually cutting, in some ways, the rest of the world off from Chinese manufacturing. And also, I saw an article that NVIDIA is not the only one. I think AMD actually recently was told by some U.S. officials that it had to stop exporting its top artificial intelligence chip to China. So I don't know how official that is yet, but at least there's rumors there around the MI100 and MI250 chips. And so this is, pretty broad based, I guess, where we're taking this AI capability and trying to keep it inside the United States, which, I mean, it gets into politics and intergovernmental issues pretty quickly here. But, the question is, can the United States build the manufacturing around, these AI chips to be able to build all of the products that China would have? Or are we doing the world a disservice by cutting this off? And then the alternate side is, would China be doing something nefarious, or Russia for that matter, with these AI chips if we allowed them to continue? So definitely a far-reaching implications here and from outside technology space, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, and indeed, I mean, it is sort of a chess game, isn't it, to try to restrict these from China. Now, of course, I suspect that China will probably get their hands on the A100 and H100 and MI250 and all of them, because frankly, it's a pretty big world, and there are a lot of trade routes out there, and also this. By the way, this rule does include the provision for export licenses to be granted on a kind of one-off basis. So I imagine that if a Chinese supercomputing lab wanted to build around H100, NVIDIA might petition the US government and get a license and be able to ship it anyway. So there are holes in this. And of course, it only does apply to those few advanced devices. Essentially, it looks like the A100 is being set as the limit. So they can't have anything that's A100 or greater in performance. So maybe the MI100 is okay, or I'm sorry, the MI110. Maybe the things like that can still be shipped, but the more advanced ones can't. And to me, the most interesting aspect of this, though, is that it's going to act as a forcing function on China. So essentially, China has increasingly advanced chip design capabilities of their own. And remember that the US is also acting to try to restrict chip design and chip manufacturing technology from China for this very reason. But we recently saw at Hot Chips an indigenous GPU and AI accelerator produced by a company called Biren in China. And it frankly looks like a pretty competitive platform. It's maybe not quite an H100, but it's a pretty competitive GPU and AI accelerator. And it's being built, designed and built in China. Well, where does this go? If they can produce a competitive, maybe not world beating, but a competitive GPU, maybe they don't need Nvidia and AMD in order to succeed. And maybe what they'll do is just pour development resources into things like this and end up basically creating new competition for AMD and Nvidia. And frankly, that is going to be an interesting situation because essentially the US export restrictions could end up having a much greater impact on Nvidia than just losing the potential for a number of sales of this generation of chips. It may end up, in fact, derailing some of the advanced processor designs coming out of the West in favor of alternative designs from China. So I guess we'll see where that goes. What do you think, Chris? Is that a likely scenario?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we could definitely see a bifurcation of the technology landscape in some ways because potentially, because we're cutting them off, they're going to develop their own things on this other side of this wall we're building. And then, it's likely in this kind of a trade war that we would then also put a barrier to, the chips they're designing coming back over here to try and limit that competition with Nvidia and ARM. And so you might end up having these two parallel technology paths going in two parts of the world, which um, maybe is good for diversity of technology, but sounds not so great to me.
Absolutely, and I guess we'll see where it goes. But honestly, I think that it's that's how technology happens to work. Nature abhors a vacuum, and China's going to fill in that vacuum if they can't get these chips.
Sure.